All right, continuing with a couple more examples using Gaussian elimination. Just to reiterate, the first step is we want a 1 in this first position in the top left corner of our matrix. We need a positive 1 value. Now, the 3 equations that we have, it does not matter which order the equations are. This bottom one, we could just as easily make this the first equation and this one the third equation, or even make this the first equation if we wanted to. So the nice thing about that is that we see the coefficient on this x is a 1, and that's what we need in this first position here. So the first thing we're going to do with our matrices is we are going to take row 1 and row 3, and we are going to swap those rows. So the notation for that is row 1 is going to go to row 3, and row 3 is going to go to row 1. So we're just swapping rows. What that does is it gives us this 1 that we need right here. Now, once we have this 1, we use that to create zeros right here. We use the 1 to create zeros here and here. All right, so to get a 0 right here, what cancels with a positive 2? That's a negative 2. What that means is that we need to multiply row 1, because that's a 1 right here. We need to multiply by negative 2 and add that to this row right here. So we're going to take row 1, multiply it by negative 2, and then we're going to add that to row 2. When we do that, negative 2 times 1 is negative 2, added to 2, that gives us this 0 right here. Negative 2 times negative 3 is positive 6, and 6 plus the 1 gives us a new value of 7 in row 2. Negative 2 times the 1 is negative 2, and negative 2 plus 5 is 3. So that's the new value here. And then negative 2 times 8 is negative 16, and negative 16 plus negative 2 is negative 18, and that's where this value came from. All right, so the next thing that we need to get rid of, we've got a 0 here, so the next step is to get a 0 here, where the negative 3 is. The opposite of a negative 3 is a positive 3. So that means we're using this row, we're multiplying it by positive 3, and then we're going to add that to the bottom row. So we are multiplying row 1 by a positive 3, and then we're going to add that to row 3. When we do that, that gives us these new values down here. All right, so I'm going to do things a little bit differently here. I want to keep in the same line of what I've been doing before. And so the top row, once we get that 1 in the top left corner and the zeros underneath it, that top row is done. We don't have to mess with that anymore. So we have a 1 here and we have zeros underneath it. The next goal is to get a 1 in this middle place right here. And we can get a 1 right here by dividing everything in this row by 7. Or, in other words, multiplying by 1/7. All right, so we're going to take 1/7 and multiply that by row 2. All right, so what that's going to give us then, 0 times 1/7 is still 0. 7 times 1/7 is 1. 3 times 1/7 is 3/7. And then negative 18 times 1/7 is negative 18 over 7. And the third row stays just like it is. All right, so now the top row is done. We have 1, -3, 1, and 8. The middle row is also done. We don't need to do anything else to it. So I'm just going to repeat those numbers here. Now what we need is, since we have a 1 in the top left corner and zeros under it, the next step is to get a 1 in the middle value, which we do have now, and get zeros under it. So we need to use this 1 to turn this -7 into a 0. And we do it the same way we did the values over here. So a -7 will cancel with a +7. So what we're going to do is multiply row 2 by +7 and add it to row 3. So row 2 times +7, and then we add that to row 3. Okay. So what that will give us now, and let me write this in white so I'm consistent, 7 times row 2 and add that to row 3. All right, so just following along, 0 times 7 is still 0. Added to a 0 is still a 0. Those don't change. 1 times 7 is 7. Added to a -7 will give us 0. 3/7 times 7 is just 3. And 3 plus -1 is 2. And then -18/7 times 7 is -18. Plus 20 will give us a +2. We can now write 3 equations out of this. The bottom equation is going to be 2z use yellow. It's going to be 2z equals 2 for the bottom equation, which means z is equal to 1. The middle equation is 1y, so just y, plus 3/7 z equals -18 over 7. Well, we know the z value is 1, so 3/7 times 1 is just 3/7. All right, so we now are going to take the 3/7 to the other side by subtracting it. And that will give us -21 over 7, which is -3. So the y value is -3, the z value is 1. Now we move up to the top equation, which is 1x minus 3y plus 1z equals 8. The y value is -3, so -3 times -3 is plus 9. Then we have plus the z value, which is 1, equals 8. That gives us x plus 10 equals 8. Therefore, x is equal to negative 2. All right, so we now have our solution, x value first of negative 2, then the y value of negative 3, and the z value of 1. All right, one last example here. So once again, the first goal is to get a 1 in the top position here. We notice the middle row starts out with a 1, so we're going to swap these two rows. Row 1 goes to row 2, row 2 goes to row 1, and so we write it like that. Row 1 and row 2 are going to switch. All right, so once we have the 1 in the top position, the next goal is to get a 0 in each of the spots underneath it. So to get a 0 here, we need to use the 1. We're going to multiply it by negative 2 and add it to this. So we're multiplying row 1 by negative 2 and adding it to row 2. Row 1 and adding that to row 2. All right, so to cancel the 3, we're going to multiply row 1 by negative 3 and add that to row 3. So when you do that, these are going to be the new values, not only for the first column, but these are the new values for each of the other columns as well. All right, so we now have a 1 in the top left corner. We have zeros underneath it. The next goal is to get this middle number here to be a 1. And we can do that by dividing this whole row by 12. Which also means we're going to be multiplying the whole row by 1/12. So that's what I'm going to write down is 1/12 times row 2. That's how we get this new row right here. 12 times 1/12 is 1. Negative 2 times 1/12 would be negative 2/12, which reduces to negative 1/6. And then 16 times 1/12 is 16/12, which reduces to 4/3. And the bottom row is going to stay just like it is. All right, so once again, we have a 1 here, zeros underneath it. We have a 1 here. Now we need to get a 0 underneath it. All right, so to get a 0 here, what cancels with a positive 11 will be a negative 11. So we're going to multiply row 2 times negative 11 and add that to row 3. So row 2 times negative 11, and then we add that to row 3. When you do that with each of these values, this times negative 11 added to this is this number. 4/3 times negative 11 added to 25 is this value right here. Okay. We can now write 3 equations out of this. The bottom equation is going to be negative 31 over 6z equals 31 over 3. You would get rid of this fraction right here by multiplying both sides by the reciprocal. So we're going to multiply by negative 6 over 31. That will cancel this out, giving us z equals now the 31s will cancel out. That's going to give you negative 6 over 3, which is negative 2. So the second equation or the middle one, is going to be y minus 1/6 z equals 4/3. We now have a z value of -2 that we can plug in. That's going to give us -1/6 times -2 will be positive 2/6, which reduces to 1/3. All right, so now we solve by moving this 1/3 over to the other side, and you move the 1/3 by subtracting it. That will cancel that out, giving us y is equal to 4/3 minus 1/3 is 3/3, which is 1. All right, so now we have the y value and the z value. We can write the top equation, which is 1x minus 5y plus 3z equals -6. Substitute our values in. The y value is 1, so -5 times 1 is -5. 3 times the z value of -2 will make this a -6 equals -6. So we have x minus 11 equals -6, and adding 11 makes x equal to 5. So our solution is the x value of 5, the y value of 1, and then the z value of -2.